A man saw three sisters being sold by their own father. And that day, he didn't just change their fate, he changed his own as well. But no one knew the past would never give up so easily. In the silence of a dusty morning, even the wind seemed to change direction out of shame. The crowd's chatter faded, eyes dropped to the ground, but feet still lingered. They'd come to see something, maybe even to buy. A makeshift platform had been thrown together out of planks in front of the old tavern. The nails were hammered and crooked, the boards cracked, but they looked strong enough. Strong enough to hold a tragedy. Standing right in the middle of the platform, with a smug grin on his face and a jacket stained with grease and booze, was Walter Briggs. He kept shuffling a deck of cards in his hands, as if everything was just another game. But nobody was laughing. He was the only one up there alongside three young girls. Isabel, the oldest, stood with her arms folded, holding her head high. Her eyes swept the crowd like arrows, looking at everyone without a hint of pity. It was like she was judging them, not herself. Next to her was Nora, looking more rebellious, jaw clenched and fists tight. The edge of her mouth trembled, but it wasn't from fear, it was anger. And behind them, Sophie, the youngest. Her gaze was fixed somewhere far away, lips quietly humming a tune, like a melody wavering on the line between childhood and madness. Walter turned to the crowd, his voice booming. Three healthy girls. One can cook, one keeps you company, one sings you to sleep. 40 for all three, or I'll sell them one by one. His voice filled the square, but no one spoke right away. The silence was heavy, not just with shame, but with the sense that something was coming. A little ways off, in the shadow of a wagon, a man was watching. His hair was turning gray, his eyes were deep, his shoulders tired. His name was Daniel Hartmann. Not many knew him, but those who did knew he lived with his three sons out in the country, away from crowds. That day, he'd only come to buy salt, nails, and coffee. But sometimes life doesn't go as planned. Sometimes fate starts when you see a girl stuck in the mud. In the wagon behind Daniel sat his three sons, Lucas, Jonas, and Elias. The youngest, Elias, squeezed his knees with his hands, glancing at his father, then looking down. None of them spoke, but their eyes were full of questions. Isabel stood tall, almost daring the crowd. No ring on her hand, no man or child behind her. Alone, unbroken. Nora looked at a man like she was about to spit. Sophie kept humming, as if she was somewhere else entirely. And in that moment, Daniel quietly stepped down from the wagon. His steps were slow and heavy, but no one dared lift their head. People stared at the ground, their shoes, the rooftops, doing anything to pretend they saw nothing. Daniel walked right up to the platform. Walter eyed him like he was drawing a card. Daniel said just one thing: "Untie the girls." Walter narrowed his eyes and grinned. "What did you say?" Daniel's voice didn't rise, but every word landed like a nail in the floor. "Untie the girls, and get off that platform, or I'll drag you down myself." Walter took a step forward. "Who do you think you are?" Without blinking, Daniel said, "I'm the man who stops cowards from selling what's already been broken." He turned to the crowd. "You came here, you watched. Now face what you've seen. These are people, not property." Walter reached for his jacket, but Daniel's stare was as heavy as a gun. The man backed off, cursed, but stepped down. He didn't even look at the girls as he left the platform. The girls didn't move. Daniel turned to Isabel. "You can go, but if you've got nowhere to go, my place has a roof that doesn't leak, a pot full of food, and three sons who won't bother you. You won't owe me anything." Isabel narrowed her eyes. "Why?" Daniel shrugged. "Because someone should have stopped this mess a long time ago, and I'm done staying silent." He turned and walked back to his wagon. The crowd quietly parted for him. When he reached the back of the wagon, he heard a sound. Isabel, then Nora, then Sophie. They all climbed down from the platform. None of them said a word. They got into the back of the wagon, among the straw sacks and coils of rope. And Daniel, without another word, took up the reins. As the wagon slowly rolled down the narrow dirt road, the town behind them faded not from sight, but from conscience. Nobody looked back. Nobody said a word. Only the crunch of the wheels and the horses' breathing filled the silence. But in Daniel's mind, the only thing echoing was Isabel's eyes. That look? It wasn't the look of a woman, but of a fighter. The girls sat in the back without speaking. Sophie was still humming, her voice mixing with the wind. Sometimes you could hear it. Sometimes you could just feel it. Nora had her arms crossed, and Isabel quietly watched their surroundings. None of them said thank you, and Daniel didn't expect them to. When they got to the ranch, the sun was dipping toward the horizon. The house was old but well kept. The porch sagged a little, but it was clean. In the yard, a yellow dog barked softly and wagged its tail, then went back to its spot in the shade. Daniel stopped the wagon, and they all got out. His sons came over to the wagon. None of them asked anything, but you could see 1,000 questions in their silence. "Each of you gets your own room," Daniel said to the girls. "Beds are ready. Doors are unlocked. If you need anything, just say so. The rest is up to you." Nora was the first to speak. "What is this place? A prison or a favor?" Daniel paused. He didn't answer right away. Then he just said, "Whatever you need it to be." That night, the girls went to their rooms. Daniel slept in the barn. On purpose. Not just to give them space, but to draw a line for himself. These weren't guests in his home. They were an earthquake from the past. And he didn't want to upset the balance. Morning came quietly. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, and the whole house felt fragile. That morning, when Daniel came down to the kitchen, Isabel was already there. The stove wasn't lit. She was just staring at it, holding a cup, but it was empty. That look in her eyes, it was sharp enough to hurt, even in the cold morning light. Daniel poured coffee into his own cup, then into Isabel's. He handed it to her in silence. She took it, but didn't drink. She just held it. This wasn't a conversation. It was a truce. Outside, Lucas was splitting wood. Jonas was checking the chicken coop. Elias was hauling hay bales, but he kept sneaking glances at the window. Sophie was watching them all from behind the glass, and Nora was kicking stones on the porch. Strangers were under the same roof, but nobody really felt like they were in the same home. Nobody talked at breakfast. The girls slowly tried to get used to their places, and the boys moved around with the awkwardness of not knowing what to do. But there was one person who did everything by doing nothing: Daniel. Days went by. Conversations were short, but glances lasted longer. Everyone was careful not to cross each other's boundaries, but they couldn't help but steal curious looks. Especially Elias. Every time he looked at Isabel, he dropped his head and looked away. Isabel noticed, but she didn't react. Not yet. One evening after dinner, Isabel was sitting on the porch, hugging her knees. The sun had turned red. Shadows had grown long. Daniel joined her, coffee in hand. They didn't talk. For a long time, they just shared the silence. Finally, Isabel spoke. "You don't know what you're doing." Daniel didn't even look over. "I don't need to know. You're here now." She narrowed her eyes. "We're not people who need saving." Daniel turned to her. "I'm not saving you. I'm just giving you a place where you don't have to run." Isabel pressed her hands on the porch rail. "Do you think we're right to be around your sons?" Daniel looked at her. "I think you're strong enough to make your own choices." Then he stood up. "For now, this is your place. Who knows about tomorrow? But today it's yours." In that moment, nothing broke, but something cracked. Maybe it was fear, maybe shame, maybe the weight of the past. Isabel nodded. "We'll stay for now." Daniel smiled. "That's enough." That night, the porch was silent. But inside, you could hear Mabel's humming. Soft, gentle, almost shy. And outside, Nora's laughter drifted from a distance, short but real. Daniel looked up at the sky from the porch. The stars were shining. And he thought to himself, some battles are won with silence. And some wounds only heal if you stop and wait. After the girls arrived, something changed in the Hartmann house. Not noise, not energy. More like the air itself. The place people breathed in had filled with a different rhythm. It was like the walls were listening now. Every step was taken carefully, every word measured. But Daniel knew this wasn't a bad thing. Change doesn't always come like a storm. Sometimes, the quietest leak brings the most lasting transformation. During the first weeks, the girls were still cautious. Sophie, surprised to wake up in the same room every morning, had started folding her clothes. Nora wandered around the property, checked the fences, and kicked at stones. Isabel put a knife under her pillow. She didn't hide it. It was like she was saying, "If you know, you know." And nobody objected. The boys were trying to get used to it too. Lucas worked wherever Isabel worked, never saying a word to her. Jonas didn't follow Nora around, but his footprints always showed up next to hers. And Elias. Every morning, he found an excuse to clean up Sophie's crumbs in the kitchen. "This table keeps getting dusty," he'd say, face bright red. One evening, in front of the fireplace, Isabel suddenly asked, "Have you ever been cruel?" Daniel didn't put down his carving knife. No. What about weak? His eyes stayed on the fire. Yes. Isabel nodded. That's what makes you real. That night, after everyone went to their rooms, the silence on the porch felt peaceful now. Not restless, not full of waiting, just stillness, staying. In the morning, Sophie made breakfast for the first time. She burned the potatoes. The cornbread was hard as a rock, but nobody complained. Jonas even managed to chew one slice twice and swallow on the third try. He smiled. Sophie raised an eyebrow at him in return. That was her version of a smile. That day, Nora and Lucas bumped into each other for the first time. Nora had left her muddy boots by the door. Lucas said, "Mud will rot the boards." Nora shot back, "What is this, a church?" "No," Lucas said calmly, "but I laid that floor myself." Nora didn't answer, but the next day, without a word, she brought extra firewood to the porch. While carrying in a crate of tomatoes from the market, Elias went up to Sophie. "I can carry it for you if you want," he said. Sophie replied, "Go ahead," and stepped aside. Elias carried it. Then he tripped. The crate flipped. Tomatoes rolled everywhere. Sophie burst out laughing. It was long and for the first time childlike. Elias blushed, but he smiled. Daniel watched everything from the porch, carving a small wooden bird, just like he used to do for his wife. Only now, he wasn't stuck in the past. On the third morning, Isabel walked into the barn to watch Elias haul hay bales. When Elias saw her, he dropped the pitchfork. "Sorry," he blurted out. Isabel crossed her arms. "You're afraid of me." Elias, without looking away. "No, I'm just afraid of saying the wrong thing." Isabel looked at him for a while. "Then don't say anything." They both went quiet. But the silence wasn't heavy, it was an understanding. At dinner, Jonas joked, "Our donkey's smarter than Lucas." Nora almost laughed. Sophie really did laugh. Her laughter bounced off every corner of the kitchen. Even Daniel smiled. Isabel put her spoon down and looked around. For the first time in a long while, it felt less like a table and more like a bond. Later that night, as Isabel passed by the porch, she stopped next to Daniel. "You never asked about our mother." Daniel nodded. "I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to. Our dad sold her first. We didn't even get to see her leave." Daniel said, "I'm sorry." Isabel didn't look away. "We stopped being sorry a long time ago." Then she handed him the bird he'd carved that night. "Take this, because you didn't just save us. You gave us a place." Daniel touched the bird's wing. "You gave me more." Isabel asked, "What's that?" Daniel's voice turned into a whisper. "A reason to finish a half-lived life." And that night, the porch filled up again. Sophie curled up in the corner, finishing the melody she'd been humming. Nora tilted her head, listening to one of Jonas's stories. Isabel sat beside Daniel in silence. No one ever said, "This is our home." But now, nobody talked about leaving either. Time didn't pass by the clock on the Hartmann ranch, but by the changes everyone went through. Days didn't come and go like they used till they brought transformation. Silence wasn't about fear anymore. It had turned into a habit. And this habit slowly became something nobody hurried. Trust. The mornings were quiet, but not empty. Isabel woke up before everyone and swept the yard. It wasn't a chore. It was more like a confession. "I'm here. I haven't run away." Sophie experimented with new flavors in the kitchen. At first, the bread burned. Then things were too salty. But after a while, there were soft rolls, cinnamon biscuits. And one morning, without anyone noticing, she left a warm apple pie on the table. When Elias saw it, he stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. Then he just took a slice and ate it without saying a word. But the smile on his face was worth more than a thank you. Nora went out beyond the ranch, fixing fences, sometimes getting into a silent competition with Jonas. Once, while she was trying to fix some worn-out ropes, Jonas walked up. "That knot's backwards," he said. Nora gave him a sideways glance and replied, "So am I." But then, she tied the knot exactly the way he'd shown her. Everything was taking shape quietly. People were beside each other, but nothing was forced. And that fragile balance cracked one morning nature's doing. That morning, when Daniel came to the well, he pulled up the bucket, but all he got was sand and cracked earth. No water. The sound from the well was empty, an emptiness that meant real danger. The news spread around the farm fast. Water was the heart of the land, the food, life itself. And now, it was gone. But nobody panicked. Daniel gathered his kids and the girls. "The river's about half an hour away," he said. We'll take turns going and bringing water back." Nobody argued. Even Mabel little Sophie grabbed the tin bucket, not with effort, but with determination. A chain formed. Buckets filled, emptied, then filled again. The weight of fatigue landed on everyone's shoulders, but nobody slumped. Even Nora kept going, never pausing. She and Jonas walked side by side. Isabel and Lucas said nothing, but walked the same beat across the dirt. That afternoon on the porch, Isabel looked at Daniel. "We need to dig a new well." Daniel looked up. "Do we?" "I'll help." Lucas came out of the house. "Me too." They made eye contact. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision, spoken out loud. The next morning, as shovels cut into the ground, something else was being dug up, the past. Sweat mixed not just with earth, but with each other. Isabel's hands were covered in blisters by the end of the first day, but she didn't complain. That night, Elias left a jar of ointment at her door. There was no note. But the next morning, the jar was empty. Jonas quietly explained to Nora how to saddle a horse properly. At first, Nora joked, "Is this more of that small-town wisdom?" But then, she listened. She learned. She tried. And when Jonas said, "Good job," at one point, she just looked away. But her eyes were shining. Mabel spent her days sewing something in the quiet corners of the house. She patched together colored scraps of fabric, pinning them to the wall. One morning while making breakfast, Elias brought her a bag of flour. "I'll carry it," he said. Mabel turned, met his eyes. "I didn't ask for help." "You didn't," Elias replied. "But you deserve it." Mabel handed him a wooden spoon. "Learn to stir, clockwise, or you'll ruin it." That evening, Daniel was back on the porch, carving another small wooden bird. The sound of carving now brought him peace, not loneliness. That night's dinner wasn't anything grand. But nothing was missing, either. Sophie slowly put down her fork and closed her eyes. Mabel passed bread to Mark. Nora handed Jonas his hat back. Isabel refilled Elias's cup. There was a quiet sense of agreement, almost like a contract. "We're here." After dinner, Isabel stepped out onto the porch. Daniel was still there. She sat down next to him. "Why haven't you sent us away yet?" Daniel rolled his pipe in his hands. "No one said they wanted to leave. What if someone comes to take us? Then I'll still be here." Silence settled, like trust. Slow, deep, taking root. And that night, for the first time, everyone slept with their doors unlocked. Trust that comes slowly is like a seed settling into the ground over time. But sometimes, the past returns like a dark shadow, and no matter how far you've come, you have to hold your breath all over again. That day, the sun hadn't set yet, but it already felt like night was falling on the farm. The sound of hoofbeats was heard in the distance first. A faint vibration, then dust clouds. At first, one of the kids thought it was just someone coming to play. But Daniel, with his knife resting on his knee out on the porch, tensed up. That look, it was a sign of trouble from the past. The man coming down the road carried the marks of time, but still stood tall with arrogant pride. Walter Briggs. He was even more disheveled now, hair gone gray, but his eyes were just as poisonous. He stopped his horse at the fence. Didn't get down. He stared at Daniel's house. Then he spit on the ground, like even the dirt was dirty just because of him. Two more men came after him, strangers, but instantly recognizable types. Slouched shoulders, searching eyes. Their hands were close to their guns, but hadn't drawn them yet. Daniel stepped forward. He came out the door. His sons lined up next to him. From inside the house, Isabel, Nora, and Sophie appeared. Isabel's hand instinctively reached for Sophie's shoulder. Walter shouted, "I've come. I'm here to take what's mine." Daniel didn't answer. "Those girls are mine. My blood. My property. You think you get to decide what happens to them now?" Daniel's voice was steady but calm. "You left them. You stopped being their father. That's not legal," Walter yelled. "And this isn't a courtroom," said Daniel. At that moment, the silence cut like a knife. Lucas stood in front of Isabel. Jonas stepped up beside Nora. Elias moved a step closer to Sophie. All of them ready. Their hands were empty, but their bodies formed a shield. Walter's hand moved to his gun. "I didn't come alone," he said. And then more hoofbeats came crashing down like thunderclouds. Two more strangers showed up, bigger, rougher, rifles slung over their shoulders. Walter raised his finger in the air. "Justice comes its own way." But another set of hoofbeats sounded. This time, from the other direction. Another rider was approaching fast. Out of the dust rode a man clothes dusty, but a hard resolve in his face. The sheriff, just in time. He pulled his horse up next to Walter, looked around. Everyone's breath was tight in the silence. Is someone going to tell me what's going on here? Walter stepped forward. This man stole my kids, kept them at his place, planning to marry them off to his sons. The sheriff squinted at Daniel. That true, but Daniel wasn't the one who answered, it was Isabel. We came. That man was selling us. On a platform, in the middle of town. We walked not just into another house, but into another life. Nora added harshly. That man has no right over us. Even his blood is a stain. The sheriff nodded. Witness. Marks, said Isabel. On our arms, in our nights, in our childhood. Walter shouted. They're lying. But then, Sophie stepped forward. Fearless. I still have the mark on my foot from the shoe you stepped on me with while selling us. What more proof do you want? The sheriff turned his gaze from Walter to Daniel. Do they want to stay? Daniel didn't answer. This time, all three girls nodded at the same time. Yes. The sheriff rolled his eyes. Then you're done here, Walter. Go. If you set foot on this land again, you'll answer to the law and to the land itself. There was no defeat in Walter's eyes, only stubbornness. This isn't over, he hissed. It ends here, Daniel said, firm and quiet. Walter pulled back, got back on his horse. His men followed him. He spat on the ground once more. Then all three rode off. The dust settled quietly over the cracked earth. The sheriff turned to Daniel. You picked a hard road, but the right one. The sheriff nodded. Don't lose it. This land, this home, this decency isn't easy to find. Then he turned his horse and left. For a while, no one spoke in front of the house. Only the wind passed by. Daniel turned. Isabel met his eyes. You didn't have to do this, she said. Daniel answered. But if I hadn't, who would I be? For the first time, Isabel's eyes filled with tears. But they didn't fall. They just stayed there. That night at dinner, nobody mentioned that man. The talk was about the well, the seedlings, the new shoes on the horse. Because the past was gone. And for the first time at that table, everyone was truly there. The silence that settled over the farm after Walter and his men left was different. It didn't come from fear or tension. It came from a battle won, a storm finally passed. It was the silence of people letting go of burdens they'd carried in their hearts for years. Deep, tired, but peaceful. That morning, Isabel was the first out on the porch again. The sky was clear, the ground cool, and the chickens hadn't made a sound yet. She had coffee in her hand, a deep calm in her eyes. Elias came out behind her and sat down. They didn't say a word. But this time, the silence wasn't a wall, it was a bond. A week went by, then a month. Everything changed slowly, but for good. Sophie was now the boss of the kitchen. She knew the measurements of flour by heart, kneaded dough by feel. Every morning, Elias volunteered to haul water. One day, he walked into the kitchen with a small package in his hand. This thing, he said. Dried plums. I thought you liked them. Sophie lowered her head, smiled. It's enough that you thought of me. But I'll take the plums too. Nora and Jonas were fixing fences, learning how to ride the horse not by Jonas's way, but her own. Sometimes they raced, sometimes they fell silent together, but in the end, they always wound up at the same place. One day Jonas turned to her and said, I've never met anyone as stubborn as you. Nora shrugged. Get used to it or run. Jonas leaned in, looked at her. I only know how to stay. Isabel spoke most with Lucas while they dug the well by, saying nothing at all. She measured with her eyes, shaped with her hands. One day, when Lucas's hand was full of cuts, he took off his glove. Isabel looked at his palm. Does it hurt? A little more every day. Good, Isabel said. It means you're growing up. That evening, they all walked up to Daniel on the porch. Isabel was in front, Nora and Sophie behind her. They stood there quietly. Daniel looked up. Yes. Isabel spoke, not looking away. We're not guests anymore. We don't want to leave. Daniel nodded. I know. And we want to talk. All of us. Daniel stood up. I'll call my sons. That night, there was no food on the table. But for the first time, the table felt full. 6 young people, an old man, and a home that, for once, felt whole. Nora spoke first. I want to marry Jonas. Daniel raised his eyebrows. Jonas looked down. Not by force, not out of debt, just to walk together. Daniel nodded quietly. Then Sophie spoke. Me too. With Elias. Because with him, everything goes quiet. My mind. My past. The world. Elias spun his glass in his hands, but he was smiling. Daniel nodded again. You sure? Sophie lowered her head. For the first time in my life, I am. And finally, Isabel spoke. There's no one holding my hand. But there's someone brave enough to reach out to me. Lucas. He never tried to change me. Or soften me. But I softened anyway. Lucas held his breath. Because you were forced to be tough, he said. Daniel looked at his 3 sons, then at the 3 girls. It's not my permission. Your steps will decide this path. But if your hearts say this is right, then may you be blessed. And the plans for a ceremony began. Simple. No show. Real. Dresses were sewn out of cotton. Wildflowers were tucked into Sophie's hair. Nora walked in her boots. Isabel wore a simple sash and carried the bird Daniel had carved in her pocket. The sons put on their best jackets. Old, but spotless. The ceremony took place under the oldest tree on the farm. Even folks from town were surprised. Some faces who'd watched the girls at the auction months ago now sat at the ceremony, eating pie. Because people don't forget quickly, but sometimes, faced with change, they go quiet. Daniel spoke. You met each other at your worst. And you chose each other anyway. That's something not every vow can make happen. If you're willing to make this choice every day, these marriages are already made. And so there was no wedding, just a life already lived, finally celebrated. There was dancing, laughing, eating all night long. Mabel played her little handmade harp. Elias hugged Sophie, softly, just once. Nora whispered something to Jonas. Isabel sat next to Daniel. She gave him back the carved bird, but this time, its wings were painted, decorated with white and little flowers. You earned this, she said. Daniel looked into her eyes. And you gave me a life. The porch was full. Laughter wasn't swallowed by silence, but covered in belonging. Now, nothing was missing. Nobody felt like they were in the wrong house anymore. And no door was ever locked again. Because this story wasn't about a rescue bought and paid for, it was about belonging, freely given.